Hi, welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. This is episode 171, recorded September 21st, 2011. I'm Ryan Shrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath.
And I'm Al Malventano.
And if you're watching the video version, that's way funnier because we're bringing up stock footage of Alan Malventano as he is calling in on the phone. Actually, are we doing Skype via your phone, Al?
Yes, actually.
Okay,
Send him a
so
link, get his contact list.
That's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive. Alan is the one out of town today. He's in Las Vegas covering some blah, 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 blah for the military, some conference, something like that. Whatever he's doing. Have fun out there in Las Vegas. Don't lose too much money. So last week was IDF. Had a lot of news from that. This week, not as much, I would say, a giant news week in the hardware industry, but still some interesting things to discuss. First, we are going to have another week of our Drobo contest, so make sure you stay tuned to the end of the show to learn how you could win a free 5-bay Drobo, a free Drobo FS, your choice in this matter, those types of things. So make sure you stick around to the end of the show. We give you the URL for that. Or you could probably just go to pcper.com and figure it out for yourself pretty easily there. So we had IDF. We got to see a lot of cool stuff there. One of the things we got to see was X79 motherboards. And it just so happens that I accidentally brought one home in my suitcase, which is convenient, right? So if you're on the audio version of the podcast, I'll try to talk my way through this as much as possible. But if you want to go to the pcper.com/podcast and view the video of it, you'll see I'm holding up an MSI X79 GD65 8D motherboard. And what is interesting about this motherboard, the 8D means 8 DIMM slots, but obviously more important is the fact that this is an X79 motherboard. You might say, right? Oh yeah, well they're not. This is the motherboards for the upcoming Sandy Bridge E platform. Pretty cool here. We don't have performance numbers or anything like that because we did not get a processor. And if I did, I would probably adhere to the NDA, but we'll move on from there. So what you can see here is this processor socket. It's actually much larger than the Sandy Bridge sockets and even the 1366. If I can get in a little bit closer here, you can see some of the 2011 pins at work here. It also has a new kind of retention clip mechanism. It actually uses 2 clips. That's how badass it is. And then it just kind of opens like that. Processor installation works pretty much the same this way. But so what is a Sandy Bridge E processor? If you've never heard of it, it is a quad core processor, quad channel memory. You can see here that there are 8 DIMM slots, which chances are most of the X79 motherboards when they ship are going to actually come with just 4 DIMM slots. This one will have 8. I think Asus and Gigabyte and those guys are going to have motherboards that have 8 DIMM slots as well. Now, most of you are kind of thinking, what am I going to do with 8 DIMM slots? Well, you can get a lot of memory for relatively cheap now. I think you can probably get 32 gigs of memory, let's say 8 4-gigabyte modules for under $200, which might seem like a little bit of overkill, but that's kind of what we do here most of the time. And I don't know, Alan, what your thoughts are on the idea of using, if you have, say you have 32 gigs of memory, just because you can, you maybe allocate 15 or 20 gigs of it as a RAM disk. Does that sound like something you would want to do on a platform with this much available, this many available DIMM slots?
Sure, you can if you want. The only catch to that is just you need some kind of piece of software that's smart enough to dump whatever that contents that is off the disk as you're shutting down and pull it back up, off of the disk as you're booting up.
Right, and there is software that will handle that, right? Though I mean, RAM disk software exists. It basically would make your shutdown time a little bit longer, as it has to write everything from that memory to a hard drive or whatever your local storage is. So you kind of have a basic, you're not losing. It's not a swap drive or something like that, or something like that. It's actually usable space. So if you thought, loading applications off of an SSD was going to be great, loading it off of DIMMs could be even more impressive.
It's even faster.
Say it again, Jeremy.
Could that cache for the SSD? That would be awesome.
I don't think it goes that many levels deep. So this particular board also has a lot of PCI Express slots. Now, I don't know if this has actually been confirmed yet, but it looks likely that the Sandy Bridge E processor is going to have many, many more lanes of PCI Express than regular Sandy Bridge does. You'll notice here that there are 5 by 16 PCI Express slots, 3 of which have a different clip than we might have seen before on MSI motherboards. Those are actually supporting PCI Express 3.0 speed. So the Sandy Bridge E processor will support PCI Express 3.0. These DIMM slots are rated at PCI Express 3.0, and even if you're using multiple GPUs, you can use 3-way SLI, 3-way Crossfire, and you'll be able to use PCI Express 3.0 across the entire allotment of those 3 slots. Now, there are no PCI Express 3.0 graphics cards yet, so you decide if that's actually worthwhile counting for at this point.
Is that white plug a 4-pin power connector?
Down here?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. So this would supply a little bit of extra power to the bus if you are going to do any kind of overclocking, things like that.
Huh.
Also down here, you've got your OC Genie button, as you would expect, your power button, as well as plus and minus buttons if you want to adjust your CPU frequency on the fly. From what I'm also told, overclocking on this platform is going to be a little bit different than what we're used to on the Sandy Bridge. Not drastically different, but at least slightly different. Also, you will notice on this side here, there are more SATA ports than normal, and I think it's also still up in the air how many SATA 6 gigabit per second ports are actually going to be on this chipset. I believe, didn't we have a news story a month ago or so talking about that they were, kind of coming back on their idea of having 6 SATA 6 gigabit per second ports on this chipset? Does anybody remember that? I don't remember exactly.
I kept hearing either way, that it had it and it didn't, and then I don't know.
Gotcha. And then finally on this particular board, you can see the configuration there, lots of USB ports, only 2 USB 3.0 ports. There might be more when it's actually finally shipping, and then standard kind of 8 analog audio, digital audio, FireWire, gigabit Ethernet, that kind of thing. This is the GD65 board, not the GD80 board, which will probably be like the super high-end flagship. But I thought it was kind of cool just so everybody can see this is what an X79 motherboard looks like, very similar. What you'll also see probably more often than not is that the kind of complexity of having 2011 CPU pins plus up to 8 DIMM slots. They're on motherboards that have 4 DIMM slots, you're going to have 2 on each side of the motherboard or each side of the socket, which kind of dictates motherboard design more so than we maybe have seen in the past. So much of these, much of the motherboards, much of the collection of motherboards that will come out at the X79 launch will probably look very similar to this. I know many of the motherboard vendors were talking about kind of the pain involved in designing for this platform.
Yeah, look how squished that the VRMs are up there.
Yes, right up here at the top.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also, I had somebody mention that to me as well, that this, not just on the MSI board, but on other vendors' boards too, it's more difficult to get many phases of power control on the processor because of that, because I think I only saw one motherboard where things were kind of shifted to the side, and it was on one of those ATX XL or XL ATX form factors, right, where it's a little bit wider and a little bit longer type of thing, so they were able to kind of squish things in different areas. It's kind of interesting. So, you're talking about a November-ish time frame for this release, and I'll be curious to see. We've been waiting for something to take over from the world of the X58 chipset for quite some time. The Sandy Bridge is a great product, and we still recommend that for most users. But if you're the hardcore he or she gamer or enthusiast, you kind of don't want to go from Core i7 960 or 970 or something like that to a Sandy Bridge. It's not really an improvement in many ways, and this could be that. First quad channel memory controller. We'll see if that actually benefits anybody in any kind of tangible way. But it's interesting to see, I guess, is kind of the thing there. Any other comments or thoughts or questions on the X79 platform from you guys? Or
I'm just kind of curious to see if the quad channel DDR really does anything more than what we were kind of expecting, just because
I
Yeah, I
wouldn't lay
think
money
that-
on it.
Yeah, I think AMD has been talking about we've kept with two channels, which this could just be them saying this, but I think that I've kind of heard others around the industry say it as well. Is that each x86 core running at a decent speed is only pulling maybe 3 to 4 gigabytes per second at max, and that's as many requests as these cores can do. And when you figure, we're seeing easily 12 to 14 gigabytes per second from most low-end solutions. I mean, and we're looking at potentially 28 to 32 gigabytes per second on that. I mean, how much is actually just wasted? I mean, what's kind of the point
Agreed.
to it?
I mean, we saw, because there was those concerns when we introduced the Linfield platform and then eventually to Sandy Bridge, because we went from a 3-channel memory configuration to a 2-channel. We didn't really see big performance drops because of it. There are maybe a few individual cases where that might happen, but I don't think it's a major issue. So I don't think jumping from 3 to 4 is going to see a big performance advantage necessarily. I think what you do kind of get is if you get into these boards with 8 DIMM slots on consumer platforms, you have just a little bit more capability in terms of upgrade, right? So you can just buy 4 DIMMs, 4 2-gigabyte DIMMs, and get 8 gigs of memory. Then you can buy 4 more and go up to 16 gigs at any time. You don't have to worry about replacing DIMMs and those types of things. So there might be a little bit of added flexibility that way. So,
well, and the best part about all that is you spend $220 and you got 32 gigs.
it's like good forever.
It's ridiculous. It really is.
It wasn't too long ago that people were spending an awful lot of money on just a 32 gigabyte solid state drive.
Also true.
Yeah.
Actually, more money than that RAM, by the way.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, memory is dirt cheap, and it's still using DDR3. It's not going to DDR4 or anything like that anytime soon. So something to think about. Now, something else that kind of interesting actually came out just yesterday, and I just posted a news story about it a little bit ago. This was we know about Kal-El, NVIDIA's upcoming SoC, the world's first quad-core ARM-based processor. It's going to be out by the end of this year, more than likely, at least in development samples, early samples, maybe not in mass for consumers to buy, but it's going to be out soon. Well, what's crazier than that is that this quad-core processor actually turns out to be a 5-core processor, which was a little confusing when I kind of just heard the headlines for this on the news posts, where Intel or NVIDIA reveals that Kal-El actually a 5-core CPU.
4.5.
So here's 4.5. So here's what's interesting about it. Go to PCPro.com. It's the top story as we record this, and probably as we publish the podcast. Here's what's interesting about this. So it's still a quad core processor. That's still what they're going to label it as. It's still what they're going to market it as. It's not, they're not going to call it a 5-core CPU. They're going to call it a 4-core CPU. And here's why. 4 of those cores, the 4 cores we knew about before, the primary cores, are built on TSMC's 40-nanometer process, the high-performance transistor type, right? So without getting too much into this, Josh, I guess we could say that in general, there tend to be multiple kind of levels of certain process technology, some meant for higher performance at higher voltages, some meant for lower performance at lower voltages, but also much lower power consumption. Is that kind of a good summation?
That's essentially it. And
Okay.
it's kind of going off on this. They've actually done this before on a single chip with their Tegra 2, because the graphics portion is actually made, I believe, using the LPG version, which is the low power, and then the other parts are the higher performance. The 1 gigahertz dual cores use the higher performance solution, whatever.
I think it's just called HP or regular or general, something like that.
Yeah, G.
So that's actually what's interesting is, even though these are built with 2 different types of transistors from TSMC, it's still one chip, right? So it's kind of like there's a certain section of the transistors on this chip design in the middle that are going to be physically different than all the transistors around it, have different physical properties than the transistors around it, and that allows them to kind of build this 5-core device. And they're billing this. They've kind of, NVIDIA is a very heavily marketing based company. They're calling this technology variable SMP. So it's basically what it does is when your phone, this is meant for phones, tablets. When your phone or tablet is in its standby mode, you've got the screen off, it's in your pocket, it's sitting on your desk, you're not actively using an application or a program, you're not on a phone call. There's still a lot of background tasks that go on. Checking email, any kind of data synchronization for Twitter, Facebook, any number of applications or devices, right? Those all require processing of some kind, but not very much of it. So the idea is there's a single core called a companion core that is actually built on the low power process technology. Kind of has a maximum frequency of about 500 megahertz, but it's not meant for speed. It's meant for ultra low power consumption. And it will be active whenever your phone is essentially not active. The other 4 cores will become active when you turn on the phone, when you need to start using any of your applications, when you start running any games, you start doing anything that involves multiprocessing. Basically when your phone kind of wakes up and you want to do stuff with it, the companion core goes to sleep and goes away, and the quad core processor begins to handle all of the tasks. And it is an interesting solution to the problem of what they say. The problem is, so if you tried to make a chip that could do the best of everything, that's kind of like the best possible solution, but it very much depends on your process technology, and NVIDIA doesn't really have control of that. They're dependent on third parties, foundry companies like TSMC for this. So if you look what Intel's trying to do with Haswell, its next architecture, it wants to have one design that it can scale between cell phones to high performance computing in the server market. NVIDIA doesn't have that capability. They don't have that process technology for it, and this is something that's going to come out before the end of the year. So other dual core and quad core processors that exist that don't take this kind of companion core route, they kind of have to target someplace in the middle of where the low power threshold is and where the high performance threshold is. And so they get a good mix of the best of both worlds, but not the best. NVIDIA is saying that with this method, they're able to get the best of both worlds. They can get the lowest possible power consumption core they can that is also compatible with, on the same die, the high performance parts that will not only be high performance, but because NVIDIA doesn't have to worry about those cores getting down to a super low idle state, they can just turn them off when the companion core is on. Then they can actually get parts that they wouldn't, or transistors they wouldn't normally be able to use, because they're only going to be used when they're high voltage consumption, high power consumption methods, right? So they claim that this is the best of both worlds, but it does come at the cost of die size, comes at the cost of probably some yield issues would be my guess. It can't be as easy to build a combined low power general purpose transistor chip than it can be, to do one or the other only, right, Josh? I mean, what other kind of drawbacks do you see to this design? Obviously, they're only kind of promoting it as here's the positives involved with it, and on paper, it seems like a really good idea. But there's definitely going to be some stuff that it will affect.
Well, I think that the two main problems that you're going to look at and you're going to see is that, one, you're going to have a bigger die, but it's not going to be absolutely huge. If you look at the original Tegra 2, it's tiny. I mean, it's something like 35 or 40 millimeters square. This is going to be around 82 millimeters square, from what I understand. But we also have 4 cores. You've got a larger GPU. And then you've got this 5th core. So you're going to be paying more for each chip. But in terms of, actual technically depositing these layers on the silicon substrate, it's not going to be as big of a deal, because it has to do, more with the lithography. It has to do how they, actually process the wafers. They've been doing this for a long time, these kind of mixed modes. So that's not going to be an issue. Now, what is going to be their issue is how well they're going to do the low-level software design to make this work effectively. Now, on paper, and you see what they say, it sounds great. It sounds like, hey, they've solved all these problems. We've got this ultra-low voltage part that is not going to pull much power at all. It's going to be, at max at 500 megahertz, it's going to be doing 300 milliwatts. And when we've got all 4 cores active and running at full speed, Tegra 2 was running at 1300 milliwatts, and this is going to do 1200 milliwatts. So you think this is fantastic, but the amount of microcode and stuff that you've got to do to be able to pull this off well it's going to be tough to do.
Right, because this is, I guess I should have mentioned it. It's software independent, right? So the operating system doesn't have to know this change is going on. The applications don't have to know this change is going on. And I think that adds a lot of complexity to the hardware side. Yeah,
all they'll see is either, okay, in this low power, they'll see 1 core is available. As they start ramping up, they'll see, 2, 3, 4 cores available. And they won't have to care about, well, I'm going to go with, CPU 1A versus CPU 1B, which is the higher performance one. It doesn't have to do any of that stuff. That's all this low-level software architecture that NVIDIA is building in. Now, getting that to actually work as advertised, I think, is going to be a bigger jump than they're expecting. Now, this is not, totally new for them, because in Tegra 2, they actually had a 3rd core on there, and this was based on an ARM7 design. So that was kind of the low power. It would do a lot of the basic things. I can't remember exactly what, but it would, it could wake up the other cores. It could do some other simple operations, so that the 2 full A9 dual chips didn't have to handle this kind of crap. So it's not totally new for them, but it's going to be very interesting to see if Kal-El comes out and really does well. From everything we've seen and we've heard, it should be okay. I think that there have been some leaked benchmarks on the Asus transformer that supposedly was leaked out on some site. And
oh, really? I hadn't seen those. Okay.
Yeah, and the performance is pretty impressive from what they've shown. I mean, it'll match the graphics performance of, I can't remember what is the other SoC out now for cell phones that is just tearing up the place, because it's a little bit more powerful than Tegra 2.
The Optimus, isn't it, from LG?
I can't remember.
All right, that's a specific phone. I mean, there's OMAP stuff. I don't know which one you're actually referring to, but yeah.
Yeah, it could be the Qualcomm one that has the super duper stuff to it. But anyway, yeah, I mean, those leak benchmarks look good. I'm kind of excited to see how this Asus Transformer 2 is going to do. Obviously, the current one is doing really damn well in sales. You can't pick that up very many places, I don't think, anymore, can you?
No, they've Asus has been more than happy with the sales on that. I bet they wish they had started a higher production run when they did, but take what they can get.
So yeah, those are the 2 main problems that we could potentially see with Kal-El. Otherwise, they've got 3 or 4 designs now under their belt. A couple iterations of Tegra 2. They had the original Tegra, and so I think that they're getting pretty comfortable. Their CPU guys are starting to do some interesting things, and this is a clever way of doing it. You're sacrificing a little bit of die space. You are sacrificing some complexity with the microcode and the control, but the overall positive effects of these changes could be maybe not disruptive, but a big step forward evolutionary-wise in terms of how power and performance in a handheld smartphone design is. So it's neat that they're stepping out and trying something a little different than the other guys.
Agreed. We will hopefully know more and actually see some results of this by the end of the year, come holiday season. Hopefully we'll see a product. Before we get into a kind of a summary, last little bits of IDF news, Corsair launches, that type of stuff, take a quick break and thank today's podcast sponsor. All right, thank you, MSI, for that. Now, IDF was last week, but there were a couple of other things that I posted about, but I don't think we discussed last week. It was kind of a short podcast last week. I was in a hurry. So I wanted to make sure I touched on a couple of things. One is, let's see, I think it was Mooley who talked about, Justin Ratner's closing keynote. That's why we didn't talk about it. It was the night after we recorded at IDF, discussed pending changes to the MIC group, the Mini Integrated Core Architectures. So this is kind of what I guess we referred to before as the Terascale projects. Remember the 80 core processor that they kind of built and played around with and tested on stuff. This is kind of what all the ray tracing, original Larrabee based technology kind of all came from. Well, even though Larrabee's been dead for a while and we haven't heard anything about it, this project is still, being kept up as the MIC. We knew about it as the Knights. Was it called the Knights Trail? Right? Was the kind of, I think it was a 32 core AI based add-in card essentially, but it was meant not for gaming but for high performance computing, places where lots of multi-threaded applications could go to work. And actually, we saw a demonstration of that involved in ray tracing later. We'll talk about it in a little bit. The main change was that they basically announced Knight's Corner, which is going to be built on the 22 nanometer Tri-Gate transistor. So these is the 3D transistors that they announced back in May, I guess it was March or May, one of those months. I don't remember. And that these new processors, these new cores were actually going to be based on 50 Intel architecture cores. So 50 of very similar cores are going to be built in this. And I think these also have the 16-bit scalar
16 wide
AVX.
vector.
Yeah, 16 wide vector unit in there. So it's capable. It's an upgraded core. It's not simply the Pentium core that we all know and loved at the time, I guess. They haven't really said exactly what greater than 50 actually means. They're just kind of holding that back right until they get closer to the release. But greater than 50, my guess would be 64 or something like that. They're also continuing their research in that market. They're seeing, what are they talking about? Shared memory, stacked memory, new communications protocols like the optical interconnects between different parts of the chip, different parts of the motherboard and the platform, and those types of deals. They're still continuing down those fields. And in a related note, then we actually stopped by and saw our old friend Daniel Pohl, who wrote some really good articles for us years ago on ray tracing, that then Intel found out that he had this great technology. He was writing these ray tracing rendering engines. They hired him away, and he started working on kind of Intel demos, basically trying to originally demonstrate the power of the Larrabee graphics processor. Well, when Larrabee as a product kind of failed there, he is still on. He's still doing these types of research projects at Intel. He did show me a new updated ray tracing demo that implemented things like anti-aliasing and HDR, things that hadn't been added in there before. It looks much better. It doesn't look as good as the Unreal 3 demos or Rage or anything like that. It's still far and away from that. These guys aren't really artists. They're technologists, right? So they're inventing ways for artists to be able to do things in the future. The coolest part that I saw, though, was the hardware, right? It was a 256 processor cores in a box. It it was, how many of those? 8 Knights Ferry mini-core processor discrete cards. Each card holds a chip with 32 Intel architecture cores running at 1.2 gigahertz. And each core can handle 4 threads for a total of 1,024 threads in flight at any given time. These are modified x86 cores with support for that 16-bit wide vector processing, so they're capable of a lot of flops. So even though there are
that
30,
machine doesn't weigh very much at all.
yeah,
No, not at all.
And it wasn't loud either. Wasn't loud either.
Not at all.
So each of those cards you're looking at, each of those blue cards actually requires 2 6-pin PCIe power connections, and there was 8 of them in a single case. So that's actually pretty impressive. There's a picture of the back there too. So it's running on 3 different power supplies.
No display it's a power supply on the upper left I'm looking at.
So there's impressive. 3 independent power plugs coming in, and all this is that server is handling all the ray tracing. And then there was a client machine that there's a picture of right below that. It's basically just like your standard consumer machine. It's using an off-the-shelf consumer gigabit router, and the router is how it transmits data and gets it all back. And it was rendering all in real time. It was pretty impressive stuff. It's still very impressive, even if Larrabee didn't turn out to be, the product we'd all kind of hoped it would be, the kind of disruptive product. So that, I guess, rounds out actual IDF news. Some other stuff happened while I was at IDF. Who wants to talk about Corsair jumping into the keyboard and mouse and business, and also revamping their headset business as well? Jeremy, did you take a look at the kind of keyboard and mouse collections that they discussed?
Well, I kind of cherry picked what I got out of it.
Okay.
For those who,
I like the pun there. I like that. No, I get it.
It's a little bit different from your average mechanical sort of high-end keyboard in that it's not clicky. That's sort of one of the things that they sell this on, is that it's not going to click. It's actually supposedly better at double and triple taps, which can be handy when you're trying to sneak back and forth between a wall and a corridor. So it's going to be interesting to see if there is actually, a visceral difference when you're gaming, as opposed to when you're just, say, using a keyboard.
Right.
So, it's going to be interesting. And they've also, they're trying to do N key rollover on it again, which is something that, PS2 keyboards, hey, they still work. It might not be classy.
Yeah.
You might not be able to plug it in and out while you're gaming, but they don't care how many keys you push. They'll work.
Right.
So USB, a lot of these
has that
companies,
limitation there.
Yeah, but they're finding ways around it, for the most part, software. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can actually manage to do this over USB, which, is kind of hard to say. Then again, as much as I like to be able to fist smash with both fists on my keyboard and actually have letters appear, it's not going to happen in a gaming situation.
Right.
There is a limit to the point where you're really not going to be pushing that many more buttons. So as long as you never hear that beep, 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 beep coming in, it won't be too bad.
So what's
the
interesting?
other hand,
Go ahead.
it's like it's about $110.
Yeah, they're not cheap. What? Here,
But you were
I spent a little bit of time with the keyboards and the mice. What's interesting to me is with only a few exceptions, Corsair has done a very good job of entering into new markets. Right? They realized memory was dying. They got out of memory. They went into SSDs. I'd say their SSD presence is minimal. Highly dominated by OCZ in terms of what they're marketing and what a mind share they have. But you look at cases, they did a very good job. Power supplies, they did a very good job. Their first HS1 and HS1A headsets were actually pretty good. I think, Josh, you tested one of those, right?
I did the HS1A. Yeah, it was very good. It's a pretty exceptional product for the price.
And so they take their time getting into things, and they tend to do it right. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt on the keyboard and mice here. What's kind of cool that I think is they basically created two lines, one for first-person shooters and one for MMO gamers. That's kind of how they're differentiated. So the keyboard for MMOs has tons of macro keys on the side. I think it's like, let's see, we got 246 by 318. Is it by 3? Yeah, so 18 macro keys, but then there's a switch that lets you do 3 times that many, right? So 36, 40, whatever that is. Tons of macros, more than you could ever want, right? I hope, at least. And then the first-person shooter version of the keyboard actually has the WASD keys, WASD, the one numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 keys have these rubber grips on them, so that and they're kind of slanted in a way that your hand sets in there a little bit better. It also comes with a wrist rest.
Did you try the wrist rest?
I did, actually.
Because I'm looking at it and I'm wondering, so it slides back and forth with your hand on it, or what?
No, it's stationary. The picture you see there on the website, it's stationary there. So, like, kind of, the palm of your hand rests on the left side, and then your thumb kind of, that space that's not textured there is kind of like where, the crook of your index finger and thumb kind of sits, right? And it seemed to do a pretty good job. Again, I haven't spent days and days playing with it. I didn't spend, more than 10 minutes actually gaming on the machines. But they, their Cherry MX keys, they're pretty nice. And then actually inside that wrist rest is also if you want to take the red rubberized top keys off, it has the standard replacement keys there, so you can, when you're going to game for a little while, you can put those keys on. If you don't want to wear them out while you're typing for the rest of that day, you can replace them there.
And it's all in the wrist rest.
It's enclosed inside the wrist rest, like it's it has a little latch you can open up, and there's all that stuff, including the little tool to take the keys out. I mean, those are the types of little things that most keyboards don't have. They don't think of, right? You go buy a Logitech or a Microsoft keyboard, and they're good and they're functional, but there's little tweaks of things. There's a lot of both of these keyboards are backlit from underneath the keys. I want to say 12 LEDs throughout it, as opposed to like 2 really bright ones. They spend a lot of time on them. They are going to be expensive. They're going to be available in the beginning of October, I believe. So I think they'll be pretty interesting. The micer have nice features as well. For the MMO mouse, it has like the thumb. I don't think we have a picture of it on the website for some reason, but the thumb area has like 9 macro keys that you can hit with the thumb in there, which would drive me insane. Like, I don't think I have the dexterity to be able to actually discern those different buttons on the thumb of a mouse. But and the first person one has the automatic DPI resolution changing. You hold down a button and it kind of goes into what they call a sniper mode. It has interchangeable weights. There's all kinds of stuff that they have done in these keyboards that I'm looking forward to getting them in and spending time playing with them. Battlefield 3 is out. I haven't played Deus Ex yet. There's a lot of stuff I can do on here to really put some time in with them. So it's, for a mechanical switch keyboard, $100 to $120 doesn't seem really crazy. Now, if you're just a user that's used to paying $30 for a keyboard mouse combo and you go about your day, $110 for a keyboard is going to sound pretty crazy. So we'll check that out. And also, I guess at least worth a quick mention is they've updated their headsets as well, the Vengeance line of headsets. They have a USB version. They have an analog version again. They have a behind the head kind of ear combo one. So not one that's, a giant headset, but one that's a little bit easier to carry around. So we'll be getting those into and putting those through the paces. So Corsair definitely took the opportunity at IDF to launch a host of new gaming accessories that we would.
I really want to know when they're going to have their 5.1 speaker set.
Yeah,
because their 2.1s are some of the best 2.1.
They never came out with a 5.1, did they?
Nope, they never did.
I'm sure they will. Give them time. But from what Josh said from the 2.1s, looking forward to that.
Yeah. Let's see what else we got. Is Alan still on the call? Has he been mysteriously silent? Did we lose Alan?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, he is there. So what do we have? Let's see. There's a newcomer to the SSD market. I didn't know if there was much to mention here about the post that Jeremy made looking at, let's see, who is this? Silicon Power. Is there anything unique about this drive or the controller or anything at all?
There's nothing special about it at all. No, it's just yet another brand that has a SandForce 2200 based solid state drive. Although we haven't really, what did these guys do before? Because it's like the first time I'm hearing their name.
No.
They worked in a strip mall?
Silicon Power!
So to put this in a little bit of perspective, it seems that you have some vendors that are picking this thing up. Like everybody seems to be picking up some form of SandForce something.
Right.
Even Memorite. Memorite were one of the original pioneers into any kind of solid state drive anything, and they didn't use anybody else's controller. They rolled their own. And now they are even making a SandForce-based unit, but Memorite has fallen so far by the wayside that even when I tried to update part numbers in the SSD decoder, I think the Memorite SandForce SSD is the only one in our decoder without part numbers because we couldn't even find them. So this is probably going to be, I don't know. It's like the only one that I can't look anything up for. It's just, here's the model name, whatever. These guys will hopefully have part numbers and such for theirs, so it's easy to look up and, from a price competitive standpoint, this one being any different than any of the other ones. The only time we see a difference in anything SandForest based is the OCC drives might be a little bit ahead as far as firmware, and they might have like a couple of extra tweaks that they've done to their firmware.
Right.
Aside from that, it's pretty much just pick from the whole litter of them and just go for the cheapest for the capacity you're looking for.
Well, still talking about SSDs, I have a question for you, Alan. What about the Seagate
Yes.
Pulsars? What are they based on? Didn't they just announce
Seagate.
those recently? Pulsar.
I didn't even see that come across the wire.
Yeah, I
Seagate
just
Pulsar.
saw those today, and they've got the Enterprise SLC version, and then they have a second version that obviously is MLC, but they still call it Enterprise Class MLC. And I didn't see any specs or whatever on what they're doing, but it finally seems like Seagate's throwing.
Is this? I think this is the Toshiba. If it's anything like what I thought it was.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, I
looking
thought there
at
was-
it. I hadn't seen this before today either. They have 6 gigabit SAS and 6 gigabit SATA options. I bet they don't say what controller they're using in the specifications. No, of course
Yeah,
not.
but a SAS solid state drive.
Well, there's other companies making them too. Actually, the SandForce
Yeah.
2200 supports SAS. They're just very little known because I don't add them to the decoder because we don't have people buying motherboards that have SAS interfaces.
Yeah.
But they are out there.
Do we even have
I'm
any
pretty sure
contacts
this is-
with Seagate anymore?
Yeah.
It's a little
Okay.
flaky. I can try.
They go up to 800
but when I'm-
gigabyte capacities.
Yeah, they're all
they're
multiples
massive.
of they're multiples of like 100 and then 200 for gigabyte space. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure this was this funky Toshiba, some kind of weird Toshiba controller thing from when I looked into it before. I like the prices I'm seeing for this thing. What is it? 200 gig is like $4,000.
Oh, is that
Sweet.
400 gig is $5,000. 800 gig is $6,000. That's kind of all over the place for prices.
These are
Oh, wait, that's-
definitely enterprise class, but
There's an MLC.
no
there we go.
interfa-
It's an 800 gig MLC model. Those are big capacities for
Yeah.
like we don't see 800 gig anything for this is 2.5 inch too. 2.5 inch
Wow.
MLC, 6 gigabit per second SAS, but it's $6,000.
No information on the controller I can see whatsoever.
yeah, that's
Well, we
not
will
surprising.
definitely follow up on that.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Part of the problem with
Interesting.
even benchmarking these things is finding a proper controller, like one that even sort of matches native motherboard, chipset style controllers. Because anytime you're trying to benchmark any of these things, you get into such high IOs per second with solid state drives that you pretty much need to have native something. Otherwise the bottleneck is just it's like using a Marvell controller back when serial ATA 6 gigabit first came out. We saw that controller, even with a regular spinning disk, that controller would have lower performance than native, even though usually the interface isn't the bottleneck.
Right.
That controller was so bad that it became the bottleneck. So,
Nice.
yeah. So, yeah,
right.
benchmarking them, even if we can benchmark them, it's still going to be tricky to get, accurate comparisons anyway.
All right, let's Jeremy, I think we saw a post. We were talking about Sandy Bridge E coming out, but apparently Intel's not finished with the original Sandy Bridge processor, and it looks like we are going to see a Core i7 2700K sometime before the end of the year.
Well, we've been hoping for that for forever because, Sandy Bridge comes out and anyone who bought a high end, or for that matter, even a middle end of the previous process, like the i7-920, they weren't going to see any noticeable difference going to the i7 27 or 2600, which was for some reason and sort of broke with Intel's pattern of you put out something, it costs $1,000. It does things really quick. No, the lead for Sandy Bridge is floating around $300-400 easy with a 2600. So we've been waiting and waiting and waiting. Hey, there's got to be a high-end Sandy Bridge family coming out. Well, no, there's Sandy Bridge E coming out. But in the meantime, you've got the i7-2700K. And everyone knows what that K means, is it's going to be unlockable. It's sitting at pretty much the same specs as you saw the 2600 as, except for the obvious fact that it's going to be clocked faster. We don't know how much faster.
No details on clock speeds or anything have been sparked in rumors. Okay.
So, is it going to be 3.6? Is it actually going to be, significantly higher than that? It's kind of hard to say. And it's not that someone's actually saw that CPU. They were just digging through, paperwork, essentially a material declaration data sheet. And all of a sudden there's this brand new product code that appears. And it's longer than a gigabyte motherboard name. Anyways, it obviously corresponds to something that's going to be faster than what we've been seeing with the 2600. It should be out soon. It's kind of hard to say. Before the end of the year, you can pretty much bet on as to whether it's going to be last minute Christmas shopping, or if you're going to see it relatively soon. We don't quite know. But it's nice to know that at least we're going to see, for the people that rushed into Sandy Bridge, something on the high end that's going to be a little bit faster than the 2600 that we've been playing with for quite a while now.
All right. One more bit of news before we jump into a couple of emails. Josh, what did we hear recently, I guess kind of semi-accurate, about Kepler, which was supposed to be NVIDIA's next generation GPU architecture, but it looks like something they saw might be like a hybrid design or something. Did you catch anything on that? Or
they mentioned that the first 28 nanometer Kepler parts are back at NVIDIA, except this isn't exactly what you'd expect. It's kind of a fusion of Fermi and Kepler, and it's in a chip without any kind of display connections or any kind of circuitry that'll do that. And they think that this chip is more of a test vehicle for NVIDIA to make sure that yields are good, make sure it actually works, and they're going to be doing some software development on there and driver development, and get a lot of these low-level bugs just out of the way and fairly quickly and easily, as compared to what they had with the original GF100. If you remember that monstrosity when it first came out, it was late. It ran really hot. It was a power eater. All those really unfortunate things for NVIDIA that they sort of fixed with the GTX 580. But they're looking to try to mitigate some of the issues that they found with the original GF100, the original Fermi part. And so by doing these smaller chips, they're able to get them out of the fab fairly quickly. They can do quite a bit of work on them and just make sure all the low-level stuff works before they start scaling it up to a much larger chip and all the other issues that those will see. So it's kind of better to do it this way, get a lot of the nasty little things out of the way, and hopefully make the workload a whole lot less when the first big chips come out. So other than that, we don't know a whole lot more. NVIDIA's staying obviously very, very quiet about it. We just hear some rumors from some partners and some foundry guys now and then. But other than that, it's going to be again, it's going to be until 2012 before we see any significant 28 nanometer parts of the desktop from either AMD or NVIDIA. We may see.
Isn't that sort of the opposite way that they do it, though? Usually you put out the big chip. It's the opposite way of the process normally. You put out the big chip first because that's where you're going to get the problems.
Yeah, this would be like putting the memory controller and a couple of the streaming processors on it instead of having like a total of 32 of them running at 1 gigahertz as compared to 680 of them. So this is kind of what they mean by scale down, is they're making sure that the individual components in a lesser state are all working as they're supposed to before they kind of stretch it up into the big chip. We'll never see this chip go into any kind of actual production. There is some thought that it might be a HPC type prototype where it doesn't need any of the kind of display technologies or a lot of the fixed function devices for texturing and anti-aliasing and that kind of stuff. But the long and short of it is there's something out there. It's kind of weird, and we don't really know what it is. How's that?
Awesome news, everybody.
So clear, concise. with our reporting.
All right, let's go ahead and jump into a couple of emails we have lined up here for you today. Podcast@pcper.com is the email address where you need to send us your emails if you have questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas. And 1-888-38-PCPer is a toll-free telephone number if you want to call and leave us a message anytime, toll-free, U.S. and Canada. Let's see if we've got Alan still on the line and he has the capability to read an email. I thought I would throw this first one to him from Pete about Windows 8 and SSDs.
All right. So, email from Pete. I've been testing Windows 8 on a ThinkPad X301, which is an older Samsung 128 gigabyte solid-state drive. He gives this huge long string of a model number that's almost a Google whack because I tried to Google it. Turns out it's like specific to ThinkPads, but okay. Firstly, the button. All right. Anyhow, I was poking around and found something interesting with a newish built-in defrag utility. So he's talking about Windows 8 defrag. Firstly, the button does not say defrag disk anymore like it did in Windows 7. It says optimize. When run on regular boring hard drive, the process says something like percent relocated, percent defragmented, etc. And he goes, I'd like to know what it's doing. Is any ways you guys can find out? What he's talking about is that when you run it on a solid-state drive, the progress bar says percent trimmed, which is completely different. So this, he thinks it's an awesome feature, and as do I. I haven't seen this at play yet because I was only playing around with Windows 8 in a virtual machine. So
I wouldn't know you had an SSD.
Yeah, it didn't go that way, which is an interesting point because that means that it might very well think it's a hard drive and do unhappy things to your solid-state drive.
That would be bad. That would be bad.
Very, very true. So I will look into that a little bit further when I'm not trying to make iPhones work in Las Vegas. Anyhow, yeah, that is. He wants to know what we think about it. We think it's great. OS level trim is definitely a good thing. There's a lot of things in Windows 7 that.
What do you think? So I thought the trim function happened as somebody used their drive. Why would you need to do that kind of after the fact?
There's a few different places where it could come into play. If an app does things within a file or does some kind of file manipulations that are not simple, just delete this file at the OS level. Like if a file grows and shrinks, for example, that kind of thing. A file just got smaller. You were editing something, you chopped half the file size off, that sort of thing. That might not necessarily get trimmed. So without, that space would basically just be allocated and remain allocated until something came along and cleaned it up, right? So this would just sort of go through and figure out, okay, where are all these files on the operating system, or everything all the files actually allocated within this partition, and it just goes through and figures out where all the free space is and just tells the drive, hey, this should all be free. So probably for 3/4 of it, the drive already knew, but this will end up cleaning up, just some of those leftovers or whatever you want to call them, which is very good. What I hope that they also can get working properly with this will be more of a coordination between Windows 8 and the driver developers for chipsets is to actually get trim working through any sort of a RAID. And I've come to learn what more of the problem with this actually is. 7. And this includes like 2008 R2, does not support passing any form of trim through any kind of device connected as a SCSI device, which is actually how most RAID type solutions show up to the operating system. Anybody that's messed with a RAID card or any kind of that thing, if you go in your device manager and you find your hard drive controller, it shows up as a SCSI device. So Windows just doesn't support it yet.
Gotcha.
Which is an issue. That's actually the reason that you can't easily trim, or actually I don't think there's any out-of-the-box solution yet to trim any kind of PCI Express solid-state drive, because they too show up as SCSI devices, and the OS just can't pass the command. There's just they just didn't implement it. And what's ironic about that is the trim command actually evolved from the SCSI. There's like an unallocator, I forget the exact name of the command, but it was originally a SCSI command designed for, shared pools of space where you can actually tell like a huge SAN, hey, I don't need this chunk of space allocated anymore, and then it could actually free it up and return that storage pool to somebody else that needs it.
Okay.
But yeah, it's so that's ironic that this is like the last thing to get implemented in Windows. So hopefully it does get implemented in Windows 8, or even better, patched for Windows 7, maybe with like the next service pack. Then we can start seeing trim past to things. And my recommendation always juggles, like use SandForce if you're in a RAID, because they handle running without trim a little better than Intel, right? So that's because of this kind of a silly, missing implementation.
All right. We have another email here, and since it comes from a Canadian, I think I should make Jeremy read it.
Oh, it is. It's Nabokov Fan 87. We've seen him a few times. And, heard from him more often than that.
Member, quite active there.
He is. So he's got an AMD 965 C3 stepping at 3.6 gigahertz in his system right now. Usually OC'd up to about 3.8. The system used to run on cold days between 42 to 45 idle and 52 under load, which, hey, that's not actually a bad temperature differential, but is now struggling to be kept below 60 degrees Celsius no matter what is happening. I've cleaned all the filters, the radiator, so obviously water-cooled, added a new filter to ensure nothing gets into the radiator, and have even gone the length of putting a fan that cools air from my room into the intake of the case. He's working with an Antec 1200 with three 90 plus CFM fans as intake, and a Corsair H50 push-pull with the same sized fans, and another 90 plus CFM fan for exhaust, as well as the stock Antec Big Boy 200mm fan on the high. He's been using Catalyst Control Center to set the GPU fan to max when sessions get stupid hot, so that's going to be nice and quiet. Planning on replacing the thermal paste and looking into higher static pressure fans. Do you have any tips for lowering the case temp while I wait for the ASC Tech 2011C to be released? Well, apart from, winter's coming, so it's not going to be so bad. Just bring in some external air for your intake. But that sounds to me, with that jump, that something's knocked the heatsink off of direct contact. It's no longer really properly connecting with it, and I'm assuming it's a CPU, although it could be the case temperature, depending, because he does talk about raising the speed on his GPU fan. But really, it sounds like something needs to be reseated, be it on the CPU, be it on the GPU if you've got a... Well, he doesn't really say, but he might have a third-party cooler on it. So you might want to really consider not necessarily changing the thermal paste, but just taking off the heat block and cleaning it up, putting another really, really thin coat on, and trying that again. Worst comes from worst. Two things. Your tubes. You don't mention that you've cleaned them.
A series of tubes?
Yes, your series of tubes. If these is clogged, the water starts, getting vortexes going, and so it's going to be sticking. So even no matter how clean the radiator is, and the fact that you're not getting anything new in, the tubes could well be contaminated and really adding a lot of turbulence to the water flow. Second thing is, in utter desperation, pop the side off of the case, aim a house fan at it. If you suddenly notice temperatures plummeting, it's very obvious that for whatever reason your airflow is no longer sufficient. Could be a fan's getting dirty, isn't spinning at what it's rated at, because 90 CFM is not bad. That's a fair amount of air being moved.
Right.
Anyone else got any comments on that one?
I'm thinking that cooler just failed. Probably.
The RAD
motherboard is providing way too much voltage.
That could be as well.
Just suddenly decided to ramp up the voltage on his CPU.
I had a motherboard.
Well, he doesn't mention if he's running an Asus or not, but they'll do that.
I did have an AM2 Asus motherboard that it fried a chip because, yeah, it just applied way too much power to it, and the temperature went up to like 80 degrees Celsius or 89, and I just thought, oh, the thermal probe is jacked. It's not running really that hot, and then I touched the heatsink and yeah, jacked everything.
I'm trying to see. He doesn't say what kind. I mean, he said radiator, but he doesn't say like.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. Corsair H50.
Yeah, he's got the H50 on a push-pull. So that rad is probably sitting just outside the case, or else it's sitting on a fan slot. But actually,
the pump might be on its way out.
Oh.
Yeah, that's possible too.
That's like the factory sealed one, right, Ryan? That's not serviceable.
Correct.
Yeah. So, check to see if it leaked a little bit. If it did and it got some air in there, then that might just be,
would he be able to hear any difference? Maybe. Yeah, I'm thinking he would probably be able to hear a difference, but I guess it would only be if he had paid attention to what it sounded exactly like before. Before it would have gotten air and that kind of stuff.
That, and I think that has a pretty darn quiet pump in that system, right? You can't really hear it.
Yeah, they tend to be pretty good. All right.
Tough call.
Yep. Let us know what you've come up with. Josh, last email from Raul. It's a short one. I figured you didn't like to read it.
About Ultrabooks. I'm a regular listener of your show. Keep up the great work. My question is about Ultrabooks. Ultrabooks. Will there be any Ultrabooks or Ultrabook-like designs with AMD processors? Will we see an Ultrabook with Trinity or Llano? Well, by very definition, I believe Ultrabook is an Intel-based...
It is an Intel brand, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so there won't be an Ultrabook. Now, that does not mean to say that somebody will not go out on a limb and do one with Llano. Llano, I think that would be... I doubt that's going to happen with that particular
the CPU would be cheaper anyways.
Well, yeah, the CPU would be cheaper, but it's still a little bit higher in terms of wattage than what an Ultrabook really wants. Now, with Trinity, these chips go down below 25-watt TDPs, and we probably will see either like MSI or Asus step forward with perhaps a limited edition Ultrabook style using one of these processors, because it does fit into the thermal category of these very, very small laptops. So don't hold your breath, but it could happen. See, again, that's we're very accurate. We know what's going on.
The answer is maybe.
Unlike some other sites.
Okay, let's see. That's going to round out our emails. Again, podcast@pcper.com is the email address for that. I promise you a contest. The address you need to visit for the bit.ly, hopefully everybody knows what that is, bit.ly/PCPerDrobo, all one word, PCPERDROBO, bit.ly/PCPerDrobo. You go there, enter the contest. You can also just go to pcper.com and do a search for Drobo. That will definitely come up. By the time, I guess, let's see this. By the time we post this up, I will have the other link back up to the front of the homepage. Actually, I can do that right when we're done with the show. So, but the address you will eventually find your way to is bit.ly/PCPerDrobo. Get your hands on a free Drobo. We're using a couple of them here. We're pretty happy with them. As soon as Alan gets back from his wonderful gallant in Vegas, I'm sure we'll have another review up relatively soon. Right, Al? Right, Al?
Yep.
See, there he goes. All right.
Did you know that Alan has been on the toilet this entire podcast?
It's
trying to ignore that,
guys.
Yes.
Oh, nice. Hardware software picks of the week. My selection is fairly straightforward. If you've never heard of a GorillaPod and you are a fan of photography at all, you should know what this is. It is a kind of a multi-arm. It's like a tripod, but you don't have to have the legs on them straight, right? So the idea here is that you can take these kind of malleable arms and wrap them around a tree.
Somebody's showing off.
wrap them around a
Wrap them around your head, Burke.
Vince, wrap it around your head. You could even do that. Absolutely. I'm using a Gorilla Pod currently while we record the video podcast. The Gorilla Pod is wrapped around the top of a Sony Bravia 3D TV so that the camera is just above the level of the bezel of the TV, freestanding. It's only touching the TV. They make different sizes. They make different weight capabilities, that kind of stuff. You can support all the way up to like giant, big SLRs with pretty hefty lenses on them and stuff. And they're not really that expensive, maybe $30 or something. So if you ever find yourself, I'd like to take a picture of this, maybe you'd like to be in the picture. Here's another capability for that as well. But you can climb up a little bit on a tree, put your camera there, set it on the 10-second timer, come down, take a picture, and you can get some pretty nifty stuff going on with that. So yeah, you can get them I got one that shipped with a ball head attachment there, so you can adjust it for being level or in level if that's what you want to look for. So that is one of the many things we have added to the studio in the last couple of weeks that I will probably be recommending as we go through the next couple of months. So Jeremy, what did you find for us this week?
And late at night, the Woot Monkey and the Gorilla Pod get up to some interesting things. They're both really flexible.
Gross.
Well, I was going to mention the 1080p ray traced Wolfenstein because, hey, ray tracing, it still ain't dead. But
nope.
You sort of brought that up earlier. So I'm going to revisit last week's pick where I was, slightly complaining that you shouldn't turn Syndicate into a first-person shooter. Well, we're going to have to wait a bit, like at least a year. But somebody is doing what essentially looks like Syndicate Total War. It's going to be real-time strategy, assassination missions, surveillance missions, assault missions, versus a global screen where you're researching technology, stealing technology like you did back in XCOM.
So it's like Mafia Wars.
Yay! Except, hopefully a little better. But it's Paradox. And Paradox did Mountain Blade. And Mountain Blade, I don't know if you actually bought the full thing or just played with the demos or just ignored it. If you can, grab the free demo, play with it a little bit. It is so amusing. These guys are developing for a PC game. It's not quite at the level of Warcraft where you got to remember 38 squared key combinations. More about the lines of like a flight sim or something where every single key on the keyboard does have a use. You don't have to use them all the time. But this could be really interesting. We're going to have to wait.
Cool.
Just, like we're going to have to wait for ray-traced games, but
maybe Syndicate
won't be reduced to a first-person shooter only, although it's still coming out as a first-person shooter.
Josh,
me.
You're up next on the list. What do you got? Something from
HP has come out with some new monitors, and I like monitors. I'm a big fan of them, and these are actually using nice IPS panels. And the one I chose is a 27-inch. It's $750, I think.
You like your paddles big?
Pardon?
You like your paddles big?
I do like my paddles big and made of IPS. Yeah. Inflatable, never mind. They're LED backlit. Resolution is 2560 by 1440.
Yep.
So it's 2/3 the price of a 30-inch super IPS panel, except it's got some other nice things. It's a DisplayPort native, so hopefully the lag isn't too bad for these. I'm pretty sure that HP probably has worked around. The last couple iterations of the 30-inch stuff haven't been too bad. So there's no built-in scaler that's slowing things down. But yeah, it's not a $1,200 part, but it performs. It looks to perform about the same. But you're losing a couple inches and a few pixels, but other than that, it's kind of a neat change, and I hope we see more products like these from other guys like Dell and Acer and
indeed
Asus.
Alan, last on our list, what do you got?
Something I've actually been using a lot this week so far. VMware last week, I think, or late last week, or early this week, or one of those, released VMware Workstation 8.
Works with Windows 8, I bet.
Which you might think, okay.
Hello?
That's one thing. Works with Windows 8. Mentioned still there. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello? All right. So they added a bunch of other stuff I've been toying around with. It can, for one thing, it works much better when you have when your virtual machine has multiple CPUs. You used to not really, you used to just sort of bottleneck them through like one of your physical cores on your system. Now it seems to like divvy that stuff up a little bit better.
Sweet.
So you're actually getting, multiple core performance within the VM, which is actually pretty good. And they added a bunch of other little bells and whistles, like USB 3 can now pass through at USB 3 speed. It's not a USB 2 link. It has it can pass HD audio through to the host system, so like 7.1 surround it can pass through. And I don't know if I'd really need to use that very much, but Bluetooth as well. So it has like this virtualized Bluetooth thing, so it can like piggyback on the host system's Bluetooth, so you can actually connect devices into the virtual machine from the outside. So just be careful with that stuff, because sometimes you're using virtual machines for like things that you want to keep inside the virtual machine and not leave. So you may or may not want those features, depending.
Interesting. All right.
Yep.
Well, that is going to wrap up the show for this week. Again, podcast at pcper.com, 1-888-38-PCPer, toll free US and Canada. pcper.com/podcast. Please share that URL in any of the gaming forums you go to. If you have any gaming groups, people that want to hear about the latest in technology, unfortunately, from the four of us, most of the time, that's the URL you should give them, pcper.com/podcast. Easy to remember, but hard to get away from. We tend to haunt you in your sleep. Twitter.com/Ryan Shrout, Twitter.com/PCPer. That's how you can follow us and get all the latest news and articles and videos and podcasts that we tend to post on the website. So definitely check us out there. So with that, we thank everybody for listening this week, and we will see you in approximately 7 more days. I'm Ryan Shrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath. And I'm Al Malventano.
I'm Al Malventano. Sorry.
Thanks for listening.